The government brought in a very swift ban and buyback, and this was a very popular move internationally. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, at the time, received quite a bit of acclaim internationally for this. And I think the Trudeau government thought that this could be a political winner in Canada as well.
Back for another week here on Closer Look across the Village Media Network with Michael Friscolanti. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Hope you had a great weekend. Good to see you.
Yes, good to see you too. Baseball started. Very excited. We're good luck.
We're like a good luck charm.
Yeah.
Right?
I know.
Where the Jays are concerned anyway.
Yeah. Shulman
3-0.
Crazy. 2 walk-off wins in a
Two
row
of them.
for the Jays. I know.
It's exciting.
It's just so Jays fans know, Dan Shulman comes here, talks to us, and the next night they go on a 3-game winning streak.
Coincidence?
I think not.
I think not. How'd your Tigers
Who
start?
else? 2-1. Yeah, 2-1. Yeah, they started off 2-0. Yeah, we shouldn't talk so much about baseball, but I'm excited. It's going to be a good season, a long season.
Yes. Okay. To tonight's program. Tomorrow is a big day where the gun buyback program is concerned. Tomorrow is the deadline if you're interested in getting compensated.
Yeah, I'd actually forgotten about this. We'd done a really good episode on it a couple months back with Noah Schwartz. He's a leading expert on kind of gun control policy in Canada, and he's the author of a great book called Targeted, Citizenship Advocacy and Gun Control in Canada.
Yes.
And he came on and gave a detailed discussion about this gun buyback program, which has kind of been years in the making. And simply put, the Trudeau government banned a couple thousand different weapons after some mass shootings and after a lot of advocacy by gun control advocates. Basically, the program, this is just the nuts and bolts,
right?
But the program allows people to declare that they own one of these weapons, and there could be compensated as long as they declare by March 31st, which is tomorrow.
Yes.
So they have till tomorrow to declare. And I believe the numbers are about 51,000 firearms have been declared by around 26,000 Canadians. Now, one of the things that's controversial about this program is police forces across the country are not involved in it. They don't want to be. There's only a handful that have agreed to be part of it. So it's even to the point now where the feds are saying they're going to send around mobile command units to different provinces to actually be available for people if they want to drop off these guns. So it's a very controversial thing. People, a lot of gun owners are like, hey, this is a waste of time. It's a waste of money. You're targeting us who are law-abiding citizens, law-abiding gun owners, and it's going to do nothing to cut back on crime, which there is some data that backs that up. People who are for it are saying, look, these weapons have been used in mass shootings. We've seen, the horrible toll this can take, and it's an opportunity for us to get some of them out of circulation and off. Potentially, there's also the potential of these guns being robbed by people who are going to use them for bad purposes. So there's a lot of arguments on both sides. But either way, the deadline is tomorrow, March 31st. Were you going to ask a question?
Quick question. So what happens if I have one of these guns that is on the banned list and I do nothing?
And that's the great question. One of the questions we asked Noah when he was on is, so if you don't declare it by the 31st, by October, I believe, it becomes illegal. Okay. And so you could be charged if you have it. But then as we talked to Noah, which police force is going to be the first to go and say, hey, we're going to enforce it? I guess it depends on the circumstances. But I thought we talked this morning. I thought it'd be great to just replay Noah's conversation. It's a great backgrounder. He really understands the issue as well as anyone. We ask all the questions that a lot of people have, and it's a good perspective on the issue. And I think what you asked is an important question. Like, who's actually going to enforce that law? Who's going to say – who's going to be the first police force in the country to go and say, this guy who legally had these guns for decades, we're now going to charge him, right? And it's funny, basically in Alberta, they've outlawed this program provincially. So if you're actually an Alberta gun owner who wants to get rid of these guns, there's basically no way to do it. Like, you can't do it anywhere in the province. So now, like I said, the feds are offering these mobile units where they'll send RCMP officers. But again, there's a huge cost to that as well. And that's part of the debate is it worth this kind of cost to do that? So with the deadline tomorrow, I would encourage everyone who has questions about this and who wants to listen to a logical conversation. Noah was great. We're going to listen to that conversation again.
5 years ago, the Trudeau government banned more than 2,000 makes and models of assault-style firearms, including the notorious AR-15. The change begged the obvious question, if you bought one of these guns back when they were legal, what are you supposed to do with it now? The answer took years to materialize, but a program is now live for owners to report those firearms for eventual destruction and receive compensation from the government. Simply put, Ottawa is going to buy back the guns. It's a controversial initiative, to say the least, with many saying it won't do a thing to actually lower gun crime in this country. Joining us tonight to help explain all of the angles is Noah Schwartz, a professor of political science at the University of the Fraser Valley in beautiful BC and author of the book Targeted: Citizenship, Advocacy, and Gun Control in Canada. Noah, long intro, but worth it. Thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, I think it's best if we start this conversation with a bit of a history lesson. What triggered the widespread ban of so many assault-style firearms? Was it one event in particular?
Yeah, so this actually goes back to before 2019, when we see this pop into the Liberal platform as a potential election promise. It had been sort of floating around in the ether for a while, especially after the massacre in New Zealand, when the government brought in a very swift ban and buyback. And this was a very popular move internationally. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern at the time, received quite a bit of acclaim internationally for this. And I think the Trudeau government thought that this could be a political winner in Canada as well. Fast forward, of course, to that spring of lockdowns in 2020, and you have the Nova Scotia massacre, where dozens of people lose their life, and the government sees this as an opportunity to introduce this legislation, and they announce in May of that year a ban on 1,500 models of what they label assault-style weapons.
We'll get into that. That there was just such a tragic case. Well, actually, let's jump into it now, Noah. What we know for now about that case is most of those guns were illegal guns. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. Most of them were illegal and smuggled from the United States, from Maine. So they didn't even originate in Canada. The shooter didn't have a firearms license, so he would not have been eligible to legally buy those firearms in Canada.
So I think that's really at the heart of this whole debate, isn't it? Noah, people are saying, you're targeting the people who are licensed and are following the rules, when the real problem is people who are finding guns illegally.
Yeah, I mean, mass shootings are really what we would call outlier events, with the exception of the United States. In the United States, we can definitely kind of see a pattern there. In Canada, they happen sporadically and rarely, and sometimes with firearms that, as we said, didn't even originate in Canada by people who aren't eligible to legally buy guns. So if we look at more repeatable instances of gun crimes, what we see, especially in places like Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, most of these guns that are being used in sort of everyday shootings are also coming from the U.S.
Noah, how many of these now banned assault-style weapons are there in Canada? Do we have any idea whatsoever?
We really don't. There are a number of estimates flying around, but the reality is that most of these firearms were non-restricted weapons, which means that there was no requirement to register for them. So you mentioned at the beginning the AR-15. That was a restricted firearm with sort of a more restricted classification. And so it did need to be, like a handgun, registered with the government. But the overwhelming majority of the guns that were banned were non-restricted. And of course, since the dismantling of the long gun registry, there was no requirement for owners to register them. So the government really has only estimates.
No, the key argument the government's making here is that these guns that they've banned are designed for military use and have no place in civilian communities. Is that a fair description, or what are people using these weapons for?
Yeah, I think it's a very unfair description, actually. Firstly, since 1990, we've had very strict laws in Canada limiting magazine capacity, right? So the thing that we see in the literature that's most effective for reducing the number of deaths in mass shootings, for example, are things like bans on large capacity magazines. So in the US, you can have a rifle with a 30, 50 round magazine, something like that. In Canada, they were, since 1990, limited to 5 rounds. So we haven't had high capacity magazines in Canada for over 3 decades. The majority of these guns, to own a firearm in Canada, you have to have a lawful reason to do so. And self-defense is not considered a lawful reason, unlike in the United States. So the people who own these own them for hunting, for sport shooting. You'll hear the talking point a lot. Yeah, you can't use a semi-automatic rifle for deer hunting. There are people who do, but mostly they're used for predator hunting, things like coyotes, that especially in rural communities like where I'm living in Abbotsford, we got a lot of farmland, and coyotes are a big problem on farms. So it's disingenuous for the government to make that argument, especially when they offered the guns to Ukraine, and Ukraine said, no, thanks, we don't actually need these.
Noah, is there a huge difference in the steps that you have to go through to get firearms licenses in Canada versus, say, the U.S.?
Definitely. So in the US, the only really federal requirement, if you're buying a gun from a licensed dealer, is to get a instant background check at time of purchase. And of course, we know famously there are ways that people get around this through private sales, through the gun show loophole. In Canada, it's a completely different system. So since 1990, we've had a really strict licensing system. You have to go through the licensing process, which involves taking a course, passing 2 tests, so a written and a in-person exam with a score of 80% or higher. You're subject to daily background checks. When you apply for your license, you have to provide character references. Your spouse has to sign off. And if you had a recent breakup within the past 2 years, you have to get the signature of your ex-partner on that form or provide their number to the RCMP. There are restrictions on where you can take your firearm, how you have to store it. As I said, on magazine limits for people with semi-automatic firearms. So it's really night and day. Since the 1990s, we've had the big ticket gun control items on the list that the literature shows are proven to limit gun fatalities.
That's very true. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Noah. So we have a situation now where thousands of these models are going to be illegal as of the end of the year. I believe around October is when it fully comes into force. So at that point, a person who has these can actually be charged with a criminal code offense if it gets to that. In the meantime, what's happening now? The government's saying register if you sign up now, we'll get the ball rolling on compensating you for these guns.
Yeah, so I've been saying since the beginning that this program is going to be more difficult than I think the government bargained for. And we're kind of seeing that play out now. It's been 5 years since the ban. Of course, if you look at Australia, if you look at New Zealand, their buybacks were carried out within a few years. Very, very quick turnaround. It's taken Canada a lot longer. There's been a lot of messaging issues with this. For example, the day before they launched the pilot program, the Minister of Public Safety is caught on a hot mic by one of his tenants saying that this program is maybe a bit more about politics than actual policy. And this has really hurt trust amongst people. First of all, taking 5 years to do this, it gives a lot of time for the program to be exposed to scrutiny and really, really harms the legitimacy. Further, the government has said there's not enough money to go around. So they haven't actually budgeted enough money to buy back the number of firearms that they think are out there. And I think they're trying to use this as an incentive to get people to sign up for the program, right? The first phase has launched, which means that gun owners have to essentially register the fact that they have one of these banned firearms. Because as I said, the government doesn't know if they do or not. And it says, sign up soon. It's first come, first serve, but you may or may not be compensated. We can't guarantee that, especially because the government also doesn't have the ability to carry this out in certain provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan. And as we mentioned before with those police forces, there are very, very few police forces actually willing to help them with this. So it's really, the government doesn't even, I think, have a clear plan of how this is going to get done.
Yeah, it seems all over the place. So you mentioned Alberta. Said some provinces are not allowing it at all. Do they have the authority to do that?
It's really tricky. It's a thorny constitutional question. Really, it should be the authority of the federal government. But because of the way policing contracts are done, it gets kind of complicated. So I think, Alberta and Saskatchewan so far have proved that they can resist pretty effectively this federal legislation.
And we're in Ontario, obviously, and we've seen a lot of Ontario police forces put out statements in the last week saying we're not going to participate in this buyback program. It doesn't look very good when the local police force are saying, we don't want to be part of this. What's their reason? Is it because of cost? They don't want the additional costs, or why are they saying no?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, there's a huge amount of demand on police forces already. They're operating on tight budgets, and they're dealing with a huge amount of problems that police haven't had to deal with in the past. For example, the toxic drug crisis and things like this. So I think they're overwhelmed already, just doing the job that they need to do. I think also they realize that the optics of this program are potentially bad. Police forces who have participated, for example, the police force in Cape Breton, I think that participated in the pilot program, I should say. I think they caught a lot of flack for that, and we saw the chief of police resign shortly after. It's not clear if that was due to the buyback or not, but the timing looked a bit fishy. So I think police forces are a bit worried about the optics of this, but I think it's mostly just capacity, right? Anytime they take to help carry this out is time that they're not spending fighting crime in their cities.
Noah, how's it been received so far? How's the response been?
I think from gun owners, I think there's a lot of folks who are very, very frustrated with the way this program has been carried out. Obviously, if you've owned one of these firearms legally for decades and you've used it responsibly, you've complied with a strict licensing process, you've stored it properly. You can imagine if all of a sudden the government decided that your car was too dangerous to own, you can't drive it anymore, it's got to sit in your driveway for 5 years or your garage, and then we'll buy it back, but we may or may not pay you.
Yeah.
Right? That would generate a lot of frustration. Yeah. So I think the community of gun owners is feeling very frustrated. And I think, once again, not being able to guarantee compensation for everyone means that there is the potential that a lot of firearms are going to be left behind by this buyback, which is going to generate, I think, more insecurity than the program actually solves.
Yeah. That's the big question right there. No, I did read somewhere, I think as of last month, more than 22,000 gun owners have reported these firearms. So that's the number, the latest number that we have. Does it surprise you that it's been that much?
No, I mean, there are likely hundreds of thousands of these firearms out there. So I think, once again, it touches on the incentive structure of buybacks, right? The people who are going to sign up and participate in a buyback like this are by nature the people who are least likely to misuse these firearms, right? You're getting the most law-abiding people because they're actually willing to go up and sign up and say like, hey, I have an illegal gun, please take it from me. So I think, we will see some participation in the buyback, but I think it's the guns that get left behind that I'm more worried about.
Noah, if you were advising the government, what would you say to them at this point? Would you just say scrap this thing entirely?
Yeah, I mean, they have a number of well-tread exit strategies from this. It's proving that it's not the political winner that I think they thought it was. Public opinion is souring on it because, once again, it's been exposed to scrutiny for so long. Research is coming out showing that this actually doesn't really work. So I think the government, their best option would be to, obviously reverse the buyback. I think that's maybe politically dangerous. An easier way for them to do it would be what's called grandfathering. So this is what's been done after other gun bans in Canada, is that the government will say, okay, if you're one of the existing owners, you can keep these firearms and use them. But, after you pass away, they have to be handed in, which is, what the government's done with handguns. So I think for them, that's probably their path of least resistance. They've sort of backed themselves into a corner on this one.
Yeah, it does seem that way. What happens down the road if we actually go through with this and it finishes and some people get paid and that moment comes where a police force comes across a whole load of these guns that are now technically illegal? I can't imagine a police force would want to be the first one to lay a charge under this because I'd imagine there could be constitutional challenges. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really politically tricky because, you're charging people who are otherwise law-abiding citizens and have possessed these firearms for a long time. So I think there's going to be a lot of reticence on behalf of police to charge people. I think when they do, it could get messy in the court system. And of course, when you're setting up an interaction between police and an armed individual, there's always a lot of room for that to go south.
Yes.
And that scares me.
Yeah, absolutely. The main crux of the government's argument is that this program is going to make our communities safer, vibrant, and more inclusive. Do you think there's any accuracy to that at all?
I don't think the data bears that out. There's really no evidence. I just recently completed a pretty large project looking at, assault-style weapon bans, looking at buybacks and things like this. And there's really no evidence in the literature that these are going to make us much safer, especially when we live next to a country that has more guns than people. We share the world's largest undefended border with them. It's quite easy for criminal elements to have access to guns either through that or through the emerging trade in privately manufactured 3D printed weapons.
That's a great point. We live in Northern Ontario. A lot of my close friends are hunters. They have firearms. I'm not into this, not my thing, but I know how passionate they are about what they do. And what they say to me is, you're targeting the wrong person here, right? I'm the most law-abiding person. I lock up my guns. I have all my hunting licenses. I do everything I'm supposed to do. I'm the epitome of a good citizen, right? What can we do to actually do more to tackle the problem of these illegal guns coming over the border or any type of activity like that that's actually illegal and actually criminal?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think on the one hand, investing more in intelligence operations to disrupt cross-border networks is always going to be a win, right? It's just like, if we think about the war on terror, the thing that really reduced terror attacks on planes wasn't necessarily, more airport security. It was the intelligence work that goes into disrupting these networks. So I think investing in intelligence is always a good investment. I think also looking at community-based programs to go into the communities where gun violence is concentrated and happening, and trying to disrupt people, get them out of the gang lifestyle, right? Incarcerating someone, we spend, over $300 a day incarcerating someone in Canada. If we can invest that money in prevention, in getting people out of the gang lifestyle and giving them a pathway to a good life, we can actually reduce the demand for illegal guns rather than constantly chasing a supply that we really realistically don't have control over.
That's right. You're a professor, you're a researcher, you're a smart guy. Obviously, I can tell from our conversation today. I think part of the frustration is our government's too focused, in this case in particular, on just the headline and the spin as opposed to doing a deep dive into what the data shows us and what actually will make a difference instead of making a good headline.
Yeah, I mean, there's always political considerations when it comes to policy, and I think the Trudeau government was very, very focused on image politics. I think the Carney government has shown that they are a bit more serious about policy, and I think that's why I've been surprised that they have not yet reversed course on this policy. It seems like it would be a pretty easy Trudeau era policy to kind of very, very quietly move backwards on in the way that they've moved backwards on other policies from the Trudeau era. So I'm hoping that, a more serious government will now take this more seriously.
Yeah. Maybe this podcast will be the turning point. No, you never know.
You never know.
There we go.
Anything could happen. Noah, before we let you go, anything else about this issue that we didn't cover that maybe we should have?
I know, as I said, whenever I get the chance, I like to argue in favor of these, community-based policing and community-based violence interruptions programs. This is what the literature shows works. These programs give the government way more bang for their buck, and they improve the lives of people in communities that are struggling. So I think that's a better investment if I could talk to politicians directly.
All right, good stuff. There's Noah Schwartz, a professor of political science at the University of the Fraser Valley in BC. Noah, we appreciate your time. Have a wonderful weekend. We think your weekend will likely be better than ours, and we know why.
Well, thank you so much.
Great conversation. One thing that didn't come up in that discussion was that the feds are capping the compensation at a certain level.
Yeah, we didn't have the specific numbers when we talked to Noah. Basically, it's around $249 million. So they're going to give out the compensation, dispense it based on the availability of funds, with that being the max,
right?
249. So people don't even really know how much money they're going to get back for these guns. By declaring them, the government's not giving them a receipt saying, okay, we're going to pay you this much. They're going to wait to see how many are collected, do the full count, and then dispense the money based on that. It's a fascinating topic. It's one it interests me because I'm not a gun owner. I'm not, but I have lots of friends who are, love to hunt. Yep. They love to use it for sport. And so, and it's an issue, especially where we are in Northern Ontario. There's a lot of gun owners and a lot of people.
Goodness,
and then the vast majority of them are law-abiding good citizens. Yeah. They're, like I said, they're friends, their family. And they have a lot of concern around this. There's a lot of questions around it. And, I won't point at this one in particular, but any kind of government policy that takes years and years to unfold and to kind of come into place, usually they're the ones where people have the most questions about, because they wonder, is it really worth it? And of course, the federal minister, the public safety minister, was caught on a hot mic back in the day, and it came out, it was reported that he was criticizing it too, basically telling a tenant of one of the buildings he owned, I think it was, that we're just doing this to appease people in Quebec. Yeah. And so there's a lot of things riding on this. Obviously, the opposition parties have a lot to say on it as well. But that's why we love this show and the conversations we have, because Noah answered a lot of the questions people are going to have. And I hope you learned something as well.
Absolutely. It will generate a ton of questions and likely a ton of comments as well. Closer look at villagemedia.ca if you have a comment on this show or any other. That's it for us this evening. For Zach Trunzo, executive producer of this evening's program, and Michael Friscoletti, our editor-in-chief here at Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for your time tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock, right here on Closer Look.